The story begins with a seemingly ordinary couple, John and Alice. Every morning, they wake up together and lead an ordinary, peaceful life. Alice is a thoughtful wife, always willing to prepare breakfast for John, provided there are ingredients in the fridge. This, however, means John has to wake up early and go out to work, earning a living for the two of them. On weekdays, John heads to the office and starts making sales calls for insurance products. His supervisor is unhappy with his poor performance and keeps pressuring him to improve his efficiency. John blames his low sales on the economic downturn, but his excuse fails to convince his boss. Meanwhile, Alice is also struggling to find a job. She attends an interview one day, but due to her lack of experience and absence of a master's degree, she is not hired. Returning home feeling dejected, things take a turn for the worse. Her landlord shows up, demanding rent, and his rude attitude only adds to her frustration. Alice checks her bank balance and realizes that after paying the rent, their account will be overdrawn by $45. It's a crushing blow. That evening, they attend a class reunion. Many of their old classmates appear to be doing well, dressed in fashionable clothes, while John and Alice feel out of place with their modest outfits. Despite this, they chat briefly with a couple of old friends, mostly about their struggles. Fortunately, the drinks at the reunion are free, allowing them to relax a little. The next day, they decide to go shopping for groceries since their fridge is empty. Driving through the suburbs, they approach an intersection without a stop sign, and suddenly, a truck crashes into them. Fortunately, neither of them is injured. They pull over and wait for the police to arrive. Nearby, there is an antique store run by an elderly woman. Alice notices the woman pick up a golden teapot from the ground and head inside the shop. Intrigued, Alice follows her into the store. After a brief conversation, the elderly woman is interrupted by a phone call, and Alice takes the opportunity to look for the teapot. She eventually finds it and is immediately drawn to it. Holding the teapot close, she rushes out of the store and into John's car, urging him to drive off immediately. John is not surprised by her impulsive behavior, while Alice insists that the teapot's allure was too strong to resist. Back home, Alice is on the phone scheduling another interview while using a straightener on her hair. In the process, she accidentally burns her forehead. At that moment, the teapot suddenly begins to vibrate. Her phone falls to the floor, and as she leans over to open the teapot, she discovers several bills inside. She quickly realizes there's something strange going on. Determined to test it, she burns herself again, and sure enough, the teapot vibrates again, spitting out $700. Now she's convinced of the teapot's secret. Next, she kicks a chair, injuring both her fingers and foot, and as expected, the teapot produces even more cash. Just as Alice is using self-inflicted pain to extract money, John faces his own crisis. He's fired from his job. When he comes home, he finds the living room in disarray and Alice lying on the floor, exhausted. She reassures him she's fine and tells him she's discovered a money-making treasure. Alice hands the teapot to John, and he also feels its strange vibration. To prove her point, she suddenly slaps him across the face, and, sure enough, the teapot immediately spits out money. She explains that as long as you hurt yourself, the teapot will produce cash. At first, John can't believe it, so Alice doesn't hesitate to kick him in the groin. The teapot shakes violently, and a large sum of money sprays out. Initially, John considers returning the teapot, realizing it could be dangerous. But at the last moment, he changes his mind, completely captivated by the wealth the teapot offers. John takes the teapot to a television show similar to Antiques Roadshow. The host estimates the teapot's value at $5,000, but John ultimately decides not to sell it. Meanwhile, a middle-aged Asian man watches the show on TV and seems to develop a strong interest in the teapot. He accurately marks John's location on a map on the wall. At this point, John and Alice have made a plan. They decide to stop after making $1 million from the teapot. For a time, they force themselves to endure pain in exchange for cash, but they also begin to enjoy the process. They start to engage in some kinky training and sexual activities, and the teapot seems to approve. Over time, the changes in both Alice and John are noticeable, not just in their appearance but also in their moods, which become much better. This transformation is especially evident during a lunch with Alice's mother and sister. They completely fail to understand how John can be doing so well on just his sales salary. Everything seems to be going smoothly, until one day, two men dressed as rabbis burst into their home, beating John and demanding to know the whereabouts of the teapot. It turns out that the teapot was a long-lost family heirloom of theirs, and their grandmother never forgave herself for losing it before she passed away. Alice hides the teapot under a pillow and lies, claiming that it has already been sold. The rabbis demand that she give them the money inside the teapot. Seizing the opportunity while John is being beaten, Alice takes the money generated by the teapot and hands it over to them. After receiving the cash, the rabbis leave. This event makes the couple realize that they need to learn more about the teapot's history. So, they visit the library and find a book about mystical magical items. In it, Alice finds a page describing the disastrous consequences that could result from using the teapot. Not wanting John to see it, she secretly tears out the page when he isn't looking. John and Alice continue to live their dream life. They buy a new car, purchase a mansion in a wealthy neighborhood, get new wardrobes, and host luxurious parties with elite guests. However, their good fortune doesn't last long. Remember that Asian man who watched the television show? One day, he rings their doorbell and introduces himself as Li Ling from a mystical community. He says he's particularly interested in ancient artifacts, especially the teapot. John is curious to hear what he has to say, but Alice adamantly refuses to part with the teapot. She tells John that if they lose the teapot, they'll have nothing left. Li Ling warns them that they are in great danger, but they eventually slam the door in his face. But Li is not the only visitor. Their former landlord, Arnie, suddenly bursts into their home, accusing them. How could worthless people like you afford to move into such an upscale neighborhood? Arnie is drunk, acting like a madman. Then, he snatches the teapot and runs outside. John tries to retrieve it, but the teapot falls into the middle of the street. Arnie drives over the teapot with his truck, yet, strangely, the teapot remains completely intact, without a scratch. Alice breathes a sigh of relief, but she's also puzzled. How can a teapot survive being crushed by a truck without any damage? They decide to visit Li Ling and ask him about the teapot's secret. Li tells them that the teapot is indestructible. The only way to rid themselves of it is to hide it in a place where no one will ever be able to find it. Li further explains the teapot's history, revealing that it had been owned by some of the kindest, as well as the most evil, people in the world. Li warns them that as long as there's even a trace of malice in their hearts, the teapot will amplify that evil. The teapot story is not mentioned again until the time of the Nazi concentration camps. Alice once again convinces John not to give up the teapot. She firmly believes that they are good people and have enough self-control not to be controlled by the teapot. So they continue down this path. One night, the two rabbis who had attacked them before break into their house again, stealing all of their money. As they rummage through the toilet tank, they mock John and Alice for being newbies who hid money in such a place. Hearing the noise, John and Alice come out of the bedroom to confront them. The two rabbis confess that they don't actually want the teapot because they know the pain and madness it causes, something their grandmother experienced firsthand. Instead, they prefer for John and Alice to endure the suffering and generate money for them. They are only after the cash. A chaotic fight ensues, with John being knocked unconscious and Alice being struck in the confusion, losing consciousness as well. As time passes, the money generated by the teapot becomes less and less, and both John and Alice are badly bruised. They finally decide they can't go on any longer and begin seeking help. They go to a biker bar and ask who the toughest person there is. The bartender points John to a seemingly tough guy. John, carrying the teapot in a bag, confronts him, and the two fight, hoping to trade pain for money. As expected, John gets hurt. At this moment, Li reappears and tells John that the teapot is consuming both their lives. Meanwhile, Alice makes a new discovery. The teapot not only responds to physical pain, but also to emotional suffering. When a skateboarder falls, the teapot immediately generates cash. She tells John about this discovery, and together they begin participating in painful activities like MMA fights and childbirth events to feed the teapot. But over time, the teapot begins to erode Alice's soul. One day, while driving, Alice sees a homeless man crossing the street. Lost in thought, she suddenly accelerates, intending to hit him. At the last moment, John grabs the steering wheel, saving the man and stopping Alice. They have an argument, with Alice feeling that John isn't supporting her plan and doesn't understand her actions. However, at that moment, the teapot spits out cash, this time because of their emotional pain. Alice suddenly realizes that the teapot can generate money not only from physical pain, but also from emotional suffering. She begins to humiliate John and discovers that this method works effectively. She asks John to hurt her as well. At first, John hesitates, but eventually agrees. He confesses to Alice that he once kissed another woman and sometimes thinks about that experience when kissing her. The teapot spits out a large sum of money again. They turn this method into a regular routine, revealing painful memories, humiliating and arguing with each other, and digging into their emotional wounds, all for the sake of making the teapot generate more money. Eventually, Alice even considers revealing a secret about her sister, that her first child is not her current husband's. Though Alice originally planned to expose this in public, she changes her mind at the last moment and decides not to. Back home, John praises her for doing the right thing and calling her a good person. However, Alice feels that her regret will affect the plan's progress, so she proposes an ultimate plan to save up $1 million and then stop. John thinks they already have enough money, but Alice disagrees. She argues that there are pedophiles and drug dealers at the playground, and if they kill someone, they can not only make money but also clean up society's trash. John disagrees, but he doesn't refuse his wife's request. They dig a grave, but at the crucial moment, John suddenly decides to say no. He asks Alice that if she had to choose between him and the teapot, who would she choose? Alice remains silent, and John, disappointed, walks away. He goes to Finley for help, but Lee tells him that it's too late. John suggests stealing the teapot and giving it to Lee, but Lee shakes his head, explaining that the teapot must be voluntarily surrendered. That night, after Alice finishes her shower, she walks into the bedroom to find John sitting on the second-floor windowsill. John asks Alice to give the teapot to Lee after his death. Alice cries and begs him not to jump, but John still leaps, causing Alice to panic. However, John doesn't die. He used this drastic action to snap Alice out of her denial. After she wakes up, John asks Alice if she is willing to give up the teapot, and Alice agrees. Later that night, as they try to rest in bed, they suddenly hear noises downstairs. John goes to check and discovers that the teapot has been stolen. The thief is Arnie, who has begun to suspect that the teapot has some sort of mystical power. In fact, Arnie and his girlfriend have already figured out how the teapot works and have started injuring themselves to earn money. John and Alice go after Arnie to retrieve the teapot, knowing that it must be handed over to Lee by their own hands to end everything. A fierce struggle ensues between the four of them, and the two men who had previously disguised themselves as rabbis also get involved, once again drawn by the teapot's temptation. Alice remembers that they had previously touched the teapot and stolen money, making them victims of the teapot as well. After a chaotic gunfight, everyone except John and Alice is eliminated. Finally, they are able to bring the teapot to Lee. Lee praises them, saying that throughout history, many kings and queens have failed to free themselves from the teapot's control, but they have succeeded.
If you enjoyed the recap, please leave a like and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.